our chalice together with the words in your order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Know that story, Ferdinand the Bull?
Yes.
It's a favorite of mine. It was actually when I was a teenager and first leading worship in my congregation that I grew up in. It was, I think, the first sermon I preached was based on that, Ferdinand the Bull. Do you know the kind of the repeating line in Ferdinand the Bull? That's sort of the heart of Ferdinand the Bull. Anyway, Kathy's got it. Was it stop and smell the flowers? That's what Ferdinand loved to do. We'll use that story sometime fully in worship, but I've been thinking about that because it's been a lifelong spiritual practice for me to stop and smell the flowers, sometimes even literally. But it turns out here in winter, in Rochester area, in upstate New York, you don't get to just stop and smell the flowers while you're walking down the street. So it's a little silly, but I wanted to share one of the ways that I found to stop and smell the flowers is a laundromat around the corner from my house. And the laundromat, I don't do my laundry there because we have a laundry in our basement. We did it there once when it was broken, but I do stop in there regularly because they have a pinball machine. And I've decided to make it my practice that when I'm walking down the street and I have a moment, I'll stop in for one quick round of pinball. Just a moment of play, a moment of fun, a moment to stop and smell the flowers amidst a busy day. And I think that's one of the reasons why we come to church, to be reminded to support each other, to stop and smell the flowers, to take in the beauty of the world and feel that gratitude, that joy, even when it's this cold with this much snow. So welcome again to our celebration of life. Let's rise in body or in spirit and sing together our opening hymn. It's 194. Will you join me in a time of meditation and prayer, followed by some shared silence? Let yourself arrive fully in your seat. Be comfortable, feel your feet flat on the ground, your breath filling you and leaving. All the ministers had flocked together for a conference, there to do some deep thinking and important learning, to have conversations that matter with colleagues who care, to reflect together on our faith. Not far from that conference, a short walk through the hills of Pacific Grove along the Monterey Bay with the cool, salty air fresh from the Pacific Ocean on our skin, we arrived at the other sanctuary in town. A winding footpath along a hill, tall green trees on either side, scattered benches to sit and rest and contemplate, and butterflies. Hundreds and thousands of monarch butterflies, dancing in swarms, darting around trees, filling the sky. Their orange wings glittered in the sunshine. A woman tells us they have just begun their mating season. Soon their children will leave this grove, this butterfly sanctuary, and strike out to the north. And not too soon after that, not too soon, but also not too far away, in several months, less than a year later, they will return, seeking again a mild sanctuary by the bay to live out the winter months. And yet it will not be the ones who depart who return, but their children's children's children. Somehow these descendants, 4 generations or more removed from their ancestors who we were witnessing that sunny afternoon, somehow their descendants will return to that same sanctuary, to the very same trees. No one knows how or why, but these butterflies find a way back to their ancestral home each year. Return out of some primordial knowing to a place they have never been before. O monarch butterfly, how does a faith like that feel? Like a child, the first time she realizes she knows her way home and can always get back? Like a new father, rediscovering a bicycle, remembering he has known how to ride all along? Like a dancer, returning to the studio after many years, whose muscles respond with their own memory to the rhythm of the music? Teach us your faith, monarchs. Remind us of that knowing that is deeper than words. Remind us what it feels like to know that we are where we belong, that our lives have a rightness and a meaning not of our own making, a rightness and a meaning laid down by generations that have come before and held by us in trust for generations to come. Teach us that faith as we share this silence together. May the silence we have shared continue to hold and heal us all. May it be so, and amen. So it looks like Steve has just arrived. Welcome, Steve. We're so glad you made it. We had faith.
Mine was sorely tested. Very. Good morning, everybody. Has anyone here ever been stuck in a snowdrift? I don't feel so bad. Breathe. The sermon this morning is entitled, Keep the Faith. Faith comes in almost as many forms as there are faithful. These variations in faith form a continuum from critically useful on the one extreme to potentially destructive on the other. I must stipulate up front that this thesis is based entirely on the experience and life observations of one keen and extraordinary individual, me. I intend to deal here with four major categories I've encountered in my life. Faith based upon empirical evidence, faith based upon past experience, faith based upon second-hand witness, and faith based upon unsupported dogma. There will no doubt be dissension among the masses, but that is appropriate, and I have faith that reason will prevail. That being an example of type number 2, see above. It will probably come as no surprise, based upon my introduction, that I consider type 1, based upon empirical evidence, to be the strongest and most useful. The best example I feel competent to expound upon today is the faith based on the theory of gravity. For the following paragraphs, I am indebted to the great and powerful wizard of Google, Wikipedia. Quote, Newton's theory of gravitation. In 1687, English mathematician Sir Isaac Newton published Principia, which hypothesizes the inverse square law of universal gravitation. In his own words, quote again, I deduce that the forces which keep the planets in their orbs must be reciprocally as the squares of their distance from the centers about which they revolve, and thereby compare the force requisite to keep the moon in her orb with the force of gravity at the surface of the earth, and found them pretty nearly to answer the equation as follows. F equals G times m1 times m2 divided by r squared, where F is the force, m1 and m2 are the masses of the objects interacting, r is the distance between the centers of mass, and g is the gravitational constant. Now, understand, Newton had no idea why objects behave this way, but through scientific observation, recording, and theorizing, he came up with that useful equation. Again, turning to Wikipedia. Newton's theory enjoyed its greatest success when it was used to predict the existence of Neptune, based upon motions of Uranus that could not be accounted for by the actions of the other planets. Calculations by both John Couch Adams and, pardon me if I don't know French well, Urbain Le Verrier, I think, predicted the general positions of the planet, and Leverrier's calculations are what led Jonathan Gottfried Galilee to discovery of Neptune. A discrepancy in Mercury's orbit pointed out flaws in Newton's theory. By the end of the 19th century, it was known that its orbit showed slight perturbations that could not be accounted for entirely under Newton's theory. But all searches for another perturbing body, such as a planet orbiting the Sun even closer than Mercury, had been fruitless. The issue was resolved in 1915 by Albert Einstein's new theory of general relativity, which accounted for the small discrepancy in Mercury's orbit. Although Newton's theory has been superseded, most modern non-relativistic gravitational calculations are still made using Newton's theory because it is a much simpler theory to work with than general relativity, and gives sufficiently accurate results for most applications involving sufficiently small masses, speeds, and energies. End quote. I might point out at this time the above science, though still not revealing the cause of the phenomenon, have given a good and reliable tool in which we continue to have the utmost of faith. Based upon these calculations, planes and rockets fly and go where we want them to. Skyscrapers stand, and Weight Watchers sells meals. Now, before Newton, there was certainly knowledge of gravity, and that leads me to my second category of faith, faith based upon personal observation. Since people were able to comprehend the world around them, we can assume they understood that if you step off a cliff, unlike a coyote chasing a bird, you will immediately fall to your peril. Presumably, those who did not understand this fell to their deaths, and another theory, that of evolution, took their lack of understanding out of the gene pool. At any rate, humans understood that things fall to earth, water flows downhill, larger tents require stronger vertical poles, and lighter objects fall more slowly than heavier ones. Oh, about that last point. Again, turning to Wikipedia. Modern work on gravitational theory began with the work of Galileo Galilei in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. In his famous, though possibly apocryphal, experiment dropping balls from the Tower of Pisa, which fell sideways. I think. And later, with careful measurements of balls rolling down inclines, Galileo showed that gravitation accelerates all objects at the same rate. This was a major departure from Aristotle's belief that heavier objects accelerate faster. Galileo postulated air resistance as the reason that lighter objects may fall slower in an atmosphere. Galileo's work set the stage for the formulation of Newton's theory of gravity. End quote. This might be a good time for me to introduce the principle of disprovability or falsifiability. Again, to Wikipedia. Falsifiability, as determined by the philosopher Karl Popper, defines the inherent testability of any scientific hypothesis. In its basic form, falsifiability is the belief that for any hypothesis to have credence, it must be inherently disprovable before it can become accepted as a scientific hypothesis or theory. The idea is that no theory is completely correct, but if not falsified, it can be accepted as the truth. It goes on to state, for example, Newton's theory of gravity was accepted as truth for centuries because objects do not randomly float away from the Earth. It appeared to fit the figures obtained by experimentation and research, but was always subject to testing, end quote. Again, as alluded to previously, Newton's equations have been superseded in light of Einstein's further conjecturing. The latest, most widely accepted theory, currently accepted then, is that Newton's law of gravitational attraction can faithfully be relied upon to calculate the interaction of non-atomic bodies with reasonable mass. Again, I stress that none of the experimentation, observation, or science to date can explain why gravitational attraction behaves as it does. That it does so reliably remains a matter of faith. Now, let's proceed to faith based upon second-hand witness. When Dorothy Gale found herself in a strange and unfamiliar land, she engaged the local population for help in returning to Kansas. Regardless of the wisdom of that endeavor, the officials offered her hope based upon their own personal experience. Follow the yellow brick road to the Emerald City to see the Wizard of Oz, saying, "Oh, what a wonderful whiz he is, because of the wonderful things he does." Dorothy proceeded down the road with a faith-based, inspired on the second-hand experience of the Munchkins, that the wonderful Wizard of Oz would in fact be able and willing to help her return home. Now, those familiar with the story know that the wizard, when approached, first refused to see Dorothy and her homies. Then, after some sentimental encouragement, granted an audience only to defer his help until a supposedly impossible task had been achieved. Only upon the successful completion of the task, the retrieval of the Wicked Witch's broom, did the wizard admit that he was, alas, incapable of granting Dorothy's request in his official capacity as the great and powerful Oz. Here we are presented with a matter of faith inspired by witness that, though sincerely proffered, ultimately proves invalid. Now we come to the sticky part that will probably get me in trouble. That prediction is based upon personal experience. Again, see above. The last type of faith, and by my calculation the most prone to abuse, is blind or baseless faith. This can be anything from, it's true because I'm the mommy, to God said it, I believe it, and that ends it. This type of faith is unprovable and, more importantly, undisprovable. The faithful one is asked or required to believe something that may or may not make sense and can never be tested, at least not in this world. Also, no credible living person has ever observed the thing in question, so no first-hand knowledge is available. I only count as credible observers of non-interested parties. The actual born-again and the spaceship probe survivors don't count. Dame Canandaigua Marsh, the great British from New Zealand crime writer, spoke of magical thinking in her novel Spinsters in Peril, featuring Inspector Roderick Allen. And I quote, "He turned over in his mind all he had read of that curious expression of human credulity called magic. As it happened, he had been obliged on a former case to dig up evidence of esoteric ritual and had become fascinated by its witness to man's industry in the pursuit of a chimera. Hundreds and hundreds of otherwise intelligent men, he found, had subjected themselves throughout the centuries to the boredom of memorizing and reciting senseless formulae, to the indignity of unspeakable practices, and to the threat of the most ghastly reprisals. Through age after age, men and women had starved, frightened, and exhausted themselves, had gotten themselves racked, broken, and burned, had delivered themselves up to what they believed to be the threat of eternal damnation, and all without any first-hand evidence of the smallest success." Unquote. Some people argue this kind of belief is comforting or necessary to make their lives bearable. That may well be true, and far from being a monster, it would strip away the sure and steady belief that one will meet her lost loved ones again after death. I would strongly caution against the steep and slippery slope of baseless certainty. It's a short distance from "I believe everything happens for a reason" to "global warming can't be real, God will fix all pollution so it doesn't matter, the free and unregulated marketplace will provide the best product at the cheapest price," or "if you kill non-Christians, God will forgive all your sins," or "if you kill infidels, you'll go to nirvana with a couple dozen virgins," or "Windows 7 works." None of these is borne out by personal experience, and all require the suspension of critical thought and the rejection of evidence at worst, or the acceptance of a lack of evidence at best. The last three examples given could obviously cause great harm and stress. Lest anyone should think that I'm picking on Christianity or Islam, I would add I also find fault with Mormonism's golden tablets read through a hat, Christian Science's defeat of sickness through faith alone, or the flying spaghetti monster's lack of pirates as the cause of climate change. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it's been shown that there were more pirates back before climate change. Now there are fewer pirates. Add to that list practically every creation story ever told. In short, I am a real buzzkill to anyone preaching a belief in something that does not hold as its primary feature the fact that faith can and indeed must be open to being completely replaced as newer, better, or more complete understanding is achieved. For that is my faith. We are created with an intellect sufficient to allow us to discover, analyze, and adopt truth based upon reality. That this truth will enable us to flourish and prosper as a global community of mankind peacefully and renewably well into the future. Let us all be evidence of that faith. Thank you.
Reach out, touch a hand, touch a shoulder. Let us feel our interconnectedness, knowing that the hand touching yours is a life connected to yours. Will you say our closing words with me? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.